The blood on Zelda Mitchell's hands had become as familiar as the dirt beneath her fingernails, though this time it belonged to a coyote pup with a shattered foreleg dragging behind its emaciated body. She knelt in the dust outside her small cabin on the outskirts of McGill, Nevada, whispering soft words while the animal's frightened eyes searched hers for signs of threat. The August sun beat down mercilessly in 1884, turning the sparse landscape into waves of shimmering heat. But Zelda barely noticed as she carefully lifted the injured creature and carried it inside to her makeshift infirmary. Her cabin smelled of sage, dried herbs, and the distinctive musk of the various animals she had treated over the past 3 years since settling in this mining town. Crates lined one wall, each containing a patient in various stages of recovery. A jackrabbit with a healing puncture wound from a hawk's talons, a barn owl whose wing had been singed in a brush fire, a rattlesnake someone had beaten with a shovel before Zelda intervened, its scales slowly regenerating over broken ribs. The townspeople thought her strange. This 22-year-old woman who lived alone and devoted her life to creatures most folks would shoot on sight. She set the coyote pup on her examination table, really just a door she had mounted on sawhorses, and began the careful work of assessing the damage. The leg was badly broken, but she had dealt with worse. Her fingers moved with practiced certainty, feeling along the bone, determining where the splint would need to sit. The pup whimpered, but did not snap at her, as if it somehow understood she meant to help. "You're going to be just fine," she murmured, reaching for her supply of clean cloth strips. "A few weeks of rest, and you will be running with your pack again." The sound of horse hooves approaching made her pause. Visitors were rare and usually unwelcome. Most people only came when they wanted her gone, convinced her kindness to predators was bringing danger closer to town. She wiped her hands on her apron and moved to the window, peering through the gap in the curtains. A man sat astride a magnificent chestnut stallion, his broad shoulders outlined against the bright sky. He wore a dusty brown hat, faded denim pants, and a shirt that had once been white but now carried the stains of hard work. Even from a distance, Zelda could see the weariness in the way he sat his saddle, not from the ride but from something deeper, more permanent. She opened the door before he could knock, stepping out onto the porch with her arms crossed. "If you are here to complain about the animals, you can save your breath and turn right back around." The cowboy removed his hat, revealing dark hair streaked with premature gray at the temples and eyes the color of a stormy sky. He was perhaps 28 or 30, with a face that spoke of long days under the sun and longer nights of worry. "Miss Mitchell? My name is Harrison Wells. I own a ranch about 15 miles east of here, near the Ruby Mountains foothills." "I know who you are," Zelda said, though that was only partially true. She had heard the name, knew he ran cattle and had a reputation as a fair man, but little else. "What do you want?" Harrison Wells turned his hat in his hands, a gesture that seemed almost nervous. "I need your help. My livestock are dying." "I work with wild animals, Mr. Wells. If your cattle are sick, you need a veterinarian from one of the bigger towns." "I have tried that," he said, and there was something raw in his voice that made Zelda pause. 3 different men came, looked at my herd, and gave me 3 different diagnoses. Nothing they suggested worked. I have lost 40 head in the last 2 months. At this rate, I will lose everything by winter." Zelda studied him more carefully now. His clothes were worn but clean, his boots risoled but well-maintained. Pride showed in every line of his body, making it clear how much this admission of need cost him. "Why come to me?" "Because Doc Henderson in town said you have a gift. Said you saved his daughter's horse when everyone else wanted to put it down. Said you understand animals in a way most people never will." Harrison met her eyes directly. "I am desperate, Miss Mitchell. I will pay whatever you ask." "I do not do this for money," Zelda said automatically, though the truth was her savings were nearly depleted. She made a little selling herbs and doing occasional sewing, but it barely kept her supplied with food and medicine for her patients. "Then do it, because animals are suffering," Harrison said quietly. "Whatever is killing my cattle, it is not quick and it is not painless. If you can help, if there is even a chance you can figure out what the veterinarians missed, I am begging you to try." The coyote pup yipped from inside the cabin, a sound of pain that made Zelda glance over her shoulder. She had work to do here, patients that needed her. But the image Harrison painted, of suffering cattle dying slow deaths, pulled at something deep in her chest. "I need to finish treating an injured coyote. Then I will need to make arrangements for my other patients while I'm gone. You will come?" The relief in his voice was palpable. "I will look at your cattle," Zelda corrected. "I am not promising anything beyond that. That is all I ask." Harrison replaced his hat, then hesitated. "The coyote, you said it is injured?" "Broken leg, probably got caught in someone's trap and managed to tear free." "Could I see?" Zelda frowned, trying to determine if this was some kind of test or trick, but his expression showed only genuine interest. She pushed open the cabin door and gestured him inside. Harrison had to duck slightly to enter, his frame too large for the small space. His eyes widened as he took in the menagerie of recovering creatures. "This is remarkable," he said, moving slowly toward the table where the coyote pup lay. "How do you keep them all calm?" "They can sense intention," Zelda said, moving to resume her work. "They know I am not going to hurt them." She expected him to scoff or make some dismissive comment, but Harrison simply nodded and stayed quiet while she set the splint, wrapped it securely, and moved the pup to a crate padded with soft cloth. His presence should have made her nervous, this stranger in her private space, but there was something steady about him that made the work feel easier rather than harder. When she finished, Harrison spoke again. "My ranch? We have had problems with mountain lions lately. Killed 2 calves last month. My foreman wants to organize a hunting party, but I have been hesitating." "Because they are only doing what mountain lions do," Zelda said, washing her hands in the basin. "They were here long before your cattle." "That is what I told him," Harrison said. "He thinks I'm being foolish, letting compassion get in the way of good business." "Are you?" He smiled, and it transformed his face from merely handsome to genuinely beautiful. "Probably, but I cannot shake the feeling that there has to be a better way than just killing everything that poses a threat. We are the ones who came into their territory, after all." Zelda felt something shift in her chest, a warming she had not experienced in years. Most men she encountered viewed nature as something to be conquered, controlled, or destroyed. Hearing this cowboy, this rancher whose livelihood depended on protecting his herd, express such sentiments felt almost surreal. "I can be ready to leave by tomorrow morning," she said. "I will need to ask Widow Chen if she can check on my patients while I'm gone." "I will pay her for her time," Harrison offered. "And I have a spare room in my ranch house where you can stay. My housekeeper, Mrs. Grundy, maintains it for occasional visitors." Zelda nodded, already mentally cataloging what supplies she would need to bring. "If this is poison or disease, I will need to examine the dead cattle as well as the living ones. Has anything changed recently? New grazing areas? Different feed?" "Nothing I can think of, but I will go over everything with you." Harrison moved toward the door, then paused. "Thank you, Miss Mitchell. I know you did not have to agree to this." "Those animals did not have to be suffering either," Zelda replied. "If I can help, I will." After he left, Zelda stood in her cabin surrounded by the soft sounds of her recovering patients and tried to ignore the way her heart was beating just slightly faster than normal. She had learned long ago not to trust easily, especially not men who showed up with promises and requests. But there had been something in Harrison Wells's eyes, a genuine pain when he spoke of his dying cattle, that made her want to believe he was different. She spent the rest of the day preparing. The coyote pup was stable, but would need careful monitoring, so she made detailed notes for Mrs. Chen. The widow was one of the few people in McGill who did not judge Zelda for her unusual calling, perhaps because she had fled her own share of judgment when she married a Chinese immigrant against her family's wishes. The jackrabbit was nearly ready to be released. The owl needed another week. The snake required heat and regular feeding, which Mrs. Chen was squeamish about but had agreed to manage. By the time the sun set, painting the Nevada sky in shades of purple and gold, Zelda had everything organized. She lay in her narrow bed that night, listening to the familiar sounds of the desert settling into darkness, and wondered what she was getting herself into. Harrison arrived promptly at dawn, leading a gentle mare for Zelda to ride. She loaded her saddlebags with supplies, basic medicines, tools for examination, and her journal where she kept notes on every animal she had ever treated. Mrs. Chen arrived to receive final instructions, pressing a package of rice cakes into Zelda's hands with orders to eat properly. The ride to Harrison's ranch took them through terrain that shifted from the sparse desert around McGill into slightly greener foothills as they approached the Ruby Mountains. Harrison proved to be an easy companion, pointing out landmarks and sharing stories about the land without demanding conversation when Zelda preferred silence. She found herself studying him when he was not looking, noting the capable way he sat his horse, the gentleness in his hands on the reins, the habit he had of scanning the horizon as if always watching for threats. "You said you have owned the ranch for how long?" she asked as they crested a rise, and the valley below came into view. 5 years. My father bought the land originally back in '74, but he died before he could build much. I was working as a hired hand in California when I got the news, came back and decided to make something of his dream. I am sorry about your father. He was a good man, just unlucky. Heart gave out before he was 50. Harrison pointed toward the cluster of buildings visible in the distance. That is the main house, the barn, the bunkhouse for my hands. I run about 300 head, though that number keeps dropping. As they drew closer, Zelda could see the ranch was well maintained despite the obvious financial strain. Fences were mended, buildings painted, equipment stored properly. 6 men worked in various areas, pausing to watch as Harrison and Zelda rode past. Their expressions ranged from curious to skeptical, and Zelda was accustomed enough to both not to let it bother her. A stout woman with iron-gray hair emerged from the main house, wiping her hands on her apron. "Mr. Wells, you are back. And this must be Miss Mitchell. Mrs. Grundy, please show Miss Mitchell to the guest room and make sure she has everything she needs. I'm going to take her out to see the herd after she has had a chance to settle in." The house interior was simple but comfortable, clearly the domain of a man who spent more time outdoors than in. Mrs. Grundy led Zelda upstairs to a small bedroom with a window overlooking the barn and corrals. "Mr. Wells is a good man," the housekeeper said unprompted. "He has been tearing himself apart over these cattle. I hope you can help." "I will try," Zelda said, setting down her bags. "That is all anyone can ask." After washing the dust from her face and changing into her work clothes, heavy canvas pants she had modified from men's trousers and a sturdy shirt, Zelda met Harrison at the barn. He had 2 horses ready, and his foreman had joined them, a grizzled man named Pete who looked like he had spent 60 years under the sun and was not impressed by much. "You are the animal woman," Pete said, looking Zelda up and down. "I am someone who understands animals," Zelda replied evenly. "That will have to be enough." They rode out to where the main herd grazed in a large pasture near a creek that ran down from the mountains. Even from a distance, Zelda could see something was wrong. The cattle moved slowly, many standing still rather than grazing. Several lay on their sides, flanks heaving. She dismounted while still several yards away, not wanting to spook the animals with a rapid approach. Harrison and Pete followed her lead, watching as she moved into the herd with slow, deliberate steps. The cattle eyed her but did not move away, too tired or too sick to bother. The first cow Zelda examined had discharge around its nose and eyes, labored breathing, and a bloated stomach. She ran her hands along its body, feeling for fever, checking the texture of its coat, looking at the color of its gums. The animal was clearly in distress but did not have the feel of infection or common disease. "What do they eat?" she asked, moving to examine another cow with similar symptoms. "Graze on the pasture grass mostly," Harrison said. "We supplement with hay in the winter, but it is still summer. They should be fine on forage." "Any new plants in the pasture this year? Anything that has grown up that was not here before?" "Not that I have noticed," Harrison said, but Pete frowned. There was that purple-flowered thing that came up after the spring rains, Wayne, the foreman said. Never saw it before, but figured it was harmless enough. Cattle usually know what not to eat. Usually, Zelda agreed, but not always. Show me these flowers. They walked the pasture until Pete pointed out several clusters of a tall plant with purple blooms and divided leaves. Zelda's heart sank as recognition hit. This is larkspur. It is extremely poisonous to cattle, especially in the spring and early summer when the plants are young and mixed in with the grass they graze on. Harrison stared at the plant as if it had personally betrayed him. How do we fix this? The cattle that are already sick I can treat with supportive care, try to help them pass the toxins through their system. The ones that are not showing symptoms yet might be fine, or might be in early stages. But first you need to move the entire herd to a different pasture and remove every single one of these plants. If even one remains, the problem will continue. We can do that, Harrison said immediately. Pete, round up the men. I want this pasture cleared by nightfall. The foreman nodded and rode off at a gallop, leaving Harrison and Zelda alone with the suffering cattle. Can you really save them? He asked quietly. Some of them, maybe most of them, but not all. Zelda knelt beside a particularly sick cow, stroking its neck. The ones who are furthest along, their systems are too damaged. The kindest thing would be to end their suffering. Tell me which ones, Harrison said, and the pain in his voice was raw enough to make Zelda look up at him. I will do what needs to be done. They spent the next hour going through the herd while ranch hands began arriving to move the cattle to a different pasture and start the laborious process of clearing the larkspur. Zelda identified 6 cows too far gone to save, and Harrison dispatched each one with a quick, clean shot, his jaw tight and his eyes bleak. For the remaining sick cattle, Zelda set up a treatment station in the barn. She mixed activated charcoal from her supplies with water, dosing each animal to help absorb remaining toxins. She showed the ranch hands how to encourage the cattle to keep drinking water, how to watch for signs of distress, how to make them as comfortable as possible while their bodies fought off the poison. Night fell before the work was finished. Zelda's arms ached. Her back protested every movement, and exhaustion made her clumsy. Harrison had worked beside her the entire time, following her instructions without question, his presence solid and reassuring even as they fought to save his livelihood. You should eat something, Mrs. Grundy said, appearing with a basket of food. Both of you before you fall over. They sat on hay bales in the barn, too tired to make it back to the house, and ate cold chicken and bread while watching the sick cattle. The barn cats wound around their feet, hoping for scraps, and somewhere in the distance a coyote howled at the rising moon. I would have lost them all, Harrison said quietly. If you had not figured out what was wrong, every single one would have died, and I never would have known why. You would have figured it out eventually, Zelda said, though she was not sure that was true. No, I would not have. He turned to look at her, his face half in shadow. The veterinarians I brought in, they did not look the way you did. They did not see the cattle as individuals suffering. They just saw livestock, numbers on a ledger. That is how most people see animals, but not you. No, not me. Zelda broke off a piece of bread, offering it to a particularly bold barn cat. When I was 8 years old, I found a dog that had been hit by a carriage. Everyone said to leave it, that it was going to die anyway, but I could not. I sat with it for 3 days, giving it water, keeping it warm. On the 4th day, it stood up and followed me home. I have been doing this ever since. Where did you learn the medicine part? Books, mostly. Observation, trial and error. She did not mention the years she had apprenticed with a veterinarian in St. Louis, or how he had wanted more from her than she was willing to give, or the way she had fled west to escape expectations that felt like chains. Animals cannot tell you what is wrong, so you have to learn to read their bodies, understand what each symptom means. It is a gift, Harrison said. What you do, the way you connect with them. I saw it today, the way even the sick cattle calmed when you touched them. Zelda felt heat rise in her cheeks and was grateful for the dim light. Compliments made her uncomfortable, especially from men, especially when they felt sincere. "You were right to contact me," she said instead. "Another few days, and the death toll would have been much higher." They finished eating in companionable silence, then made a final round of the sick cattle before heading to the house. Zelda fell into bed without bothering to fully undress, and sleep claimed her instantly. The next 3 days passed in a blur of careful monitoring and treatment. Zelda barely left the barn, catching sleep in short stretches and eating whatever Mrs. Grundy brought her. Harrison matched her hour for hour, refusing to rest while his animals suffered. They developed an easy rhythm of working together, anticipating each other's needs without having to speak, moving around each other in the close quarters of the barn like dancers who had rehearsed for years. On the 4th morning, Zelda examined the last of the seriously ill cattle and allowed herself a small smile. She's going to make it. They all are, except for the ones we already lost. Harrison, who had been holding the cow's head steady, looked up with an expression of such pure relief and joy that Zelda's breath caught. "You did it. You actually did it." "We did it," she corrected. "I could not have managed this alone." He released the cow and stood, closing the distance between them in 2 long strides. For a moment, Zelda thought he was going to embrace her, and her body tensed in automatic defense. But Harrison caught himself, stopping just short of touching her, his hands hovering uncertainly in the space between them. "I do not know how to thank you," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "You saved my ranch, my future, everything." "You do not need to thank me," Zelda said, trying to step back and finding herself against the stall wall. "I just did what needed to be done." It was more than that. Harrison's gray eyes searched her face, intense and earnest. "You care about these animals the way I do? You understand them. Most people think I am weak for not wanting to just shoot the mountain lions, for hesitating to poison the coyotes that sometimes take lambs. They say compassion is a luxury a rancher cannot afford. What do you say? I say compassion is what makes us human. Without it, we are just predators ourselves." Something in Zelda's chest loosened, a knot she had not realized she carried unwinding slowly. She had spent so long being the strange one, the woman people whispered about and avoided, that finding someone who not only understood but shared her philosophy felt almost miraculous. "I should probably head back to McGill," she said, though the words felt wrong even as she spoke them. "My own patients need me." "Stay," Harrison said immediately, then seemed to catch himself. "I mean, just for a few more days to make sure the cattle are truly stable, and my ranch needs your hands. I have been thinking if you were willing, I could pay you to work here regularly, check on the livestock, advise on how to manage the land in a way that is kinder to the wild animals. You could keep your cabin in town, but come out here a few days each week." It was a generous offer, probably more generous than he could afford given the losses he had taken. But more than that, it was an invitation to be valued for exactly what she was, rather than being expected to be something different. "I will think about it," Zelda said carefully. "But I do need to get back soon. The coyote pup needs its splint checked, and I worry Mrs. Chen will have trouble with the rattlesnake feeding." "Of course. I will ride back with you tomorrow if that suits you. I need to pick up supplies in town anyway." That evening, Harrison invited Zelda to join him for dinner in the main house rather than eating in the barn as they had been. Mrs. Grundy had prepared a proper meal, pot roast with vegetables from her kitchen garden, and they sat at the dining table that was too large for 2 people, leaving echoing spaces of emptiness. "Do you ever get lonely out here?" Zelda asked, cutting her meat. "Sometimes," Harrison admitted. "My parents are both gone. I have a sister back east, but we have not seen each other in years. The ranch hands are good men, but it is not the same as having someone to really talk to." "I understand that. People in McGill mostly think I am strange." "You are," Harrison said, then smiled when she looked up sharply. "That is meant as a compliment. Strange is better than ordinary. Strange means you see the world differently, and that difference matters." They talked long into the evening, sharing stories of their pasts with surprising ease. Harrison told her about growing up on a failed farm in Missouri, about the father who dreamed bigger than his means, about learning to break horses at 15 for extra money. Zelda told him about her childhood in Chicago, about parents who wanted her married to a banker's son, about the suffocating feeling of being expected to fit a mold that bore no resemblance to her actual shape. "When did you come west?" Harrison asked, pouring them both more coffee. 3 years ago, I could not take one more dinner party where I had to smile and nod while men discussed business and women discussed embroidery. I wanted to actually do something, to use my hands and my mind for work that mattered. "You left alone?" Zelda hesitated, then nodded. "My parents disowned me. They said I was throwing away my future, that I would end up destitute or worse. Maybe they were right about the destitute part." "You are not destitute," Harrison said firmly. "You have skills people need even if they are too stubborn to admit it. And now you have a job offer from a rancher who definitely needs those skills." "A job offer I have not accepted yet," Zelda reminded him. But she was smiling. "Not yet," Harrison agreed. "But you will." His confidence should have annoyed her, but instead it felt like a warm blanket on a cold night, comforting and welcome. She found herself wanting to believe him, wanting to imagine a future where she split her time between her cabin and this ranch, where her work was valued and her strange ways were seen as assets rather than flaws. The ride back to McGill the next day felt too short. Zelda kept finding excuses to stop, checking a plant she claimed not to recognize, pointing out a hawk's nest, anything to stretch the time. Harrison seemed to understand, matching her pace without complaint, filling the silence with observations about the land and stories about the ranch. When they finally reached her cabin, Mrs. Chen came out to greet them, her face creased with concern. "Miss Zelda, I am glad you are back. The coyote pup has been crying for you, and I think the owl's wing is bothering it." Zelda dismounted quickly, her professional focus snapping back into place. "Thank you for taking care of them, Mrs. Chen. Let me check everyone over." Harrison helped unload her bags, carrying them into the cabin without being asked. He stayed while she examined each of her patients, noting with approval that Mrs. Chen had followed all her instructions perfectly. The coyote pup yipped with joy when Zelda picked it up, licking her face with enthusiasm that made both women laugh. "The splint is holding well," Zelda announced after a careful examination. "Another 2 weeks, and we can remove it." "Will you release it back to the wild?" Harrison asked, watching the pup with interest. "That is always the goal. These animals deserve to live their natural lives, not be kept as pets. Even though you would probably enjoy the company?" Zelda met his eyes, seeing understanding there. "Especially then. What I want does not matter compared to what they need." After Mrs. Chen left, Harrison lingered in the doorway, clearly reluctant to leave. "You will think about my offer? About working at the ranch?" "I will," Zelda promised. "Give me a few days to make sure everything here is stable, and I will send you my answer." "I will be hoping for a yes." He tipped his hat, a gesture that felt both formal and oddly intimate. "Thank you again, Zelda, for everything." It was the first time he had used her given name, and the sound of it in his deep voice sent a shiver down her spine that had nothing to do with cold. She watched him right away, then turned back to her patients and tried to ignore the sudden emptiness of her cabin. The next week passed slowly. Zelda threw herself into her work, treating a prairie dog with an infected wound, rescuing a kit fox from a tumble down a dry creek bed, tending to her regular patients. But her thoughts kept drifting to the ranch, to Harrison's gray eyes and steady hands, to the way he had worked beside her without complaint, to the respect he had shown her knowledge and skills. She told herself she was being foolish. She barely knew the man. 1 week of working together did not mean anything significant. The smart thing would be to maintain her independence, to avoid entangling her life with his, but her heart, usually so careful and guarded, had other ideas. On the 8th day after returning from the ranch, Zelda was treating a young deer that had been grazed by a bullet when she heard horses approaching. She looked up to see Harrison riding toward her cabin, but this time he was not alone. Pete and 2 other ranch hands accompanied him, and they were leading a wagon. Zelda stepped out to meet them, wiping her hands on her apron. "What is this?" Harrison dismounted, removing his hat in a gesture she was coming to recognize as nervous. I know I said I would wait for your answer, but I thought maybe I could sweeten the deal. He gestured to the wagon, and the ranch hands began unloading materials. Lumber, nails, wire mesh, tools. I figured if you're going to be working with animals regularly, you need a proper setup. So I brought supplies to build you a real animal hospital bigger than your cabin, with separate areas for different types of patients. Zelda stared at the pile of materials, emotions warring in her chest. It was generous, almost overwhelming. It was also presumptuous, assuming she would say yes. But more than anything, it was thoughtful in a way that made her eyes sting with unshed tears. You did this without knowing what I would decide? She asked. I did this because whether you work for me or not, you need a better space for this. Harrison moved closer, his voice dropping to something more private. But I really hope you will say yes, Zelda. Not just because my ranch needs you, though it does, but because I need you. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Harrison, you do not even know me. I know enough. I know you are kind, but not weak. I know you value life in all its forms. I know you work harder than anyone I have ever met. I know that week we spent saving my cattle was the best week I have had in years, and I do not want it to be the only one. I do not know how to do this, Zelda admitted, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. I have spent so long avoiding entanglements, keeping people at a distance. What if I am not any good at letting someone in? Harrison took her hand, his calloused palm warm against hers. Then we will figure it out together. I am not asking you to have all the answers right now. Zelda, I am just asking you to give us a chance. She looked down at their joined hands, then up at his face, seeing hope and fear and honest affection written there. In the background, Pete and the other ranch hands had tactfully moved away, giving them privacy while pretending great interest in unloading the wagon. I will work for you, Zelda said slowly, but I keep my cabin in town, and I need 1 day a week for my wild patients, no matter what is happening at the ranch. Done, Harrison agreed immediately, and we take things slowly. I am not making any promises about what this might become beyond a working relationship. Fair enough. Harrison's smile was brilliant, transforming his serious face. Though I should warn you, I am very patient when I want something badly enough. Despite herself, Zelda laughed. You are impossible. I prefer determined. He squeezed her hand gently, then released it. Now, can you show us where you want this animal hospital built? They spent the next 3 days constructing what was truly a remarkable building. Harrison had thought of everything. A large main room for examinations and treatment, smaller isolated areas for animals that needed quiet, proper ventilation, a storage area for medicines and supplies, even a small attached living space with a bed and stove in case Zelda needed to stay overnight with critical patients. The ranch hands worked with surprising cheerfulness, and Zelda realized Harrison must treat them well for them to be so willing to spend their time on a project that did not directly benefit the ranch. Pete even showed an unexpected gentleness with the animals, helping Zelda move her patients into their new accommodations with careful hands. By the time they finished, Zelda had a professional setup that rivaled anything she had seen in the cities back east. She stood in the center of her new hospital, turning slowly to take it all in, and felt tears finally spill over. It is too much, she whispered when Harrison came to stand beside her. It is exactly enough, he countered. You deserve a space that honors the work you do. That night, after the ranch hands had returned to the ranch and Harrison was preparing to follow, Zelda found herself reluctant to let him leave. They stood outside her cabin in the gathering dusk, moths beginning to dance around the lantern light. When do you want me to start at the ranch? She asked. Whenever you are ready, tomorrow, next week, whenever works for you. Tomorrow, Zelda decided. I will ride out tomorrow afternoon after checking on my patients here. Harrison's smile was soft in the dim light. I will be waiting. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. The gesture was so tender, so intimate, that Zelda's breath caught. Then he was mounting his horse and riding away, leaving her standing alone with her heart racing and her thoughts in chaos. True to her word, Zelda arrived at the ranch the next afternoon. Harrison met her at the barn, and they immediately fell into the easy working rhythm they had established during the crisis with the poisoned cattle. He showed her the full extent of his operation, introducing her to every animal on the ranch, pointing out which horses had old injuries, which cows were particularly prone to illness, where the goats liked to escape the fencing. "You have goats?" Zelda asked, delighted by the small herd of dairy goats Mrs. Grundy kept for milk and cheese. "5 of them, and each one thinks it is in charge," Harrison said with affection. "Fair warning. They will try to steal anything you set down, including your hat." As if to prove his point, a young goat immediately began chewing on Zelda's sleeve. She laughed and gently extracted her arm, scratching the goat between its ears until it closed its eyes in bliss. "You are going to spoil them," Harrison warned, but his tone was fond rather than critical. "That is my job," Zelda replied. Over the following weeks, a routine developed. Zelda spent mornings in McGill tending her wild patients, then rode to the ranch for the rest of the day and often into the evening. She checked the livestock, advised on pasture rotation to prevent future poisonous plant issues, treated minor injuries and illnesses, and consulted on ways to protect the herd from predators without resorting to wholesale slaughter. Harrison was always nearby, working alongside her or simply keeping her company. They talked about everything and nothing, sharing opinions on politics and philosophy, debating the best methods for breaking a horse to saddle, discussing what they had read in books. Harrison, Zelda discovered, was surprisingly well-read despite his rough exterior. With a particular fondness for poetry, he seemed almost embarrassed to admit. "My mother loved poetry," he explained one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "She used to read to me when I was young. I guess some of it stuck." "Would you read to me sometime?" Zelda asked impulsively. Harrison looked surprised, then pleased. "I would like that." The shift from professional relationship to something deeper happened so gradually that Zelda could not point to an exact moment when things changed. It was in the way Harrison started keeping a cup of coffee ready for her when she arrived, in the way Zelda began staying for dinner more nights than not, in the accidental touches that lingered a moment longer than necessary, the looks that held unspoken questions, the awareness that hummed between them like a plucked string. Mrs. Grundy watched it all with knowing eyes, but said nothing, simply making sure there was always enough food for 2 at dinner and leaving them alone on the porch in the evenings. One morning in late September, Zelda arrived at the ranch to find Harrison in a fury. One of his mares had been attacked during the night, claw marks raking her flank, blood staining her coat. Pete and the other hands were already saddled up, rifles ready, determined to hunt down the mountain lion responsible. "You cannot stop us this time," Pete said, his jaw set. "This has gone on long enough. Those cats are getting bolder." Zelda examined the mare carefully, cleaning and treating the wounds while Harrison stood nearby, torn between his protective instincts for his animals and his reluctance to kill unnecessarily. "These wounds are defensive," Zelda said finally. "Look at the pattern. This mare kicked or charged something, and it swiped at her as it retreated. This was not a hunting attempt." "How can you tell?" Pete demanded. "Because if a mountain lion was hunting, it would have gone for her throat or tried to bring her down. These are shallow wounds on her hindquarters. She surprised it, probably wandered too close to where it was denning or sleeping, and it defended itself." "So what do you suggest?" Harrison asked. "We cannot just let the lions wander through the ranch." "Let me try something," Zelda said. "Give me 3 days before you organize a hunt." Pete looked skeptical, but Harrison nodded. 3 days. Zelda spent those 3 days studying the ranch's perimeter, identifying the paths the mountain lions used to move through the area. She found tracks, scat, claw marks on trees, building a map of their territories. Then she began modifying the ranch layout, moving the horses' night pasture away from the natural corridors the lions preferred, setting up noisemakers and lights at strategic points to encourage the big cats to go around rather than through the ranch property. On the 3rd night, she sat up late with Harrison on a ridge overlooking the ranch, watching and waiting. Just after midnight, a mountain lion appeared, moving with fluid grace through the moonlight. It approached one of the noisemakers Zelda had installed, tensed at the unexpected sound, then veered away, circling around the ranch buildings rather than entering them. "It worked," Harrison breathed. "You redirected them." "They do not want conflict any more than you do," Zelda said. "They just need a clear path that does not intersect with your livestock." Harrison turned to her, his face illuminated by the moon, his expression intense. "You are brilliant. Do you know that? Absolutely brilliant." Before Zelda could respond, he was kissing her, his lips warm and slightly chapped against hers, his hand cupping her jaw with infinite gentleness. For a moment she froze, old fears rising up. Then something in her softened, yielded, and she was kissing him back, her hands fisting in his shirt, her heart thundering. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Harrison rested his forehead against hers. "I am sorry. I should have asked first." "If you had asked, I might have said no out of fear," Zelda admitted. "I am glad you did not give me the chance." "I love you," Harrison said simply. "I have been trying not to say it, trying to give you space and time like you asked for, but watching you work, seeing how you think, how you care, how you find solutions no one else would even imagine, I cannot keep it in anymore. I love you, Zelda Mitchell, and I want you in my life as more than just someone who works for me." Zelda's eyes stung with tears. "I am terrified. Of me? Of this? Of wanting something this much? Every time I have let myself want something, it has been taken away, or I have been punished for wanting it in the first place." Harrison took both her hands in his grip steady and sure. "I cannot promise nothing will ever hurt you again. Life does not work that way. But I can promise I will never deliberately hurt you. I can promise I will value you exactly as you are. And I can promise that what you want will always matter to me as much as what I want." "I do not know how to be someone's wife," Zelda said, the word feeling strange in her mouth. "I am not asking you to be a wife in the way you are thinking. I do not want you to stop working with animals or to spend your days cooking and cleaning. I want a partner, Zelda, someone who works beside me, who challenges me, who makes life bigger than it would be alone." She looked at their joined hands, at the calluses they both bore from hard work, at the way their fingers fit together. "I think I love you too," she whispered. "I did not want to, but I do." Harrison's answering smile was radiant. He kissed her again, slower this time, a claiming and a promise all at once. When they finally made their way back to the ranch as dawn was breaking, everything felt different, charged with new possibility. The engagement was short because neither of them saw a point in waiting. They married in McGill's small church on a crisp October morning, with Mrs. Grundy and the ranch hands as witnesses, Mrs. Chen in the front pew dabbing at her eyes. Zelda wore a simple blue dress and carried a bouquet of wildflowers Harrison had picked himself. Harrison wore his best suit, slightly too tight in the shoulders, his hair slicked back, his eyes never leaving Zelda's face. "I do not have much to offer you," he said during the vows he had written himself. "Just a ranch that is more dream than reality, work that never ends, and a heart that is completely yours." "That is everything," Zelda replied, her voice steady despite the tears on her cheeks. "That is more than I ever thought I would find." When the preacher pronounced them married, Harrison kissed her thoroughly enough to make Pete whistle and Mrs. Grundy laugh. They rode back to the ranch together, Zelda seated in front of Harrison on his stallion, his arms secure around her waist, and she thought she had never felt safer in her life. Their marriage was not like any Zelda had seen growing up. They worked side by side from sunup to sundown, Zelda managing the health of all the ranch animals while continuing to treat her wild patients in McGill. Harrison consulted her on every major decision, valuing her input as much as Pete's or his own instincts. They argued sometimes, passionate debates about the best course of action, but even their disagreements felt respectful, rooted in mutual regard rather than power struggles. The nights were a revelation. Zelda had been nervous about the physical aspects of marriage, but Harrison was patient and gentle, taking his time, making sure she felt safe and cherished. He touched her like she was precious, like he was learning something sacred, and Zelda found herself blooming under his attention, discovering desires she had never allowed herself to feel. "I never want to stop discovering you," Harrison murmured one night, his fingers trailing patterns on her bare shoulder. "Every day I learn something new, and every day I fall more in love." "You're going to spoil me for all other cowboys," Zelda teased, and Harrison laughed, pulling her closer. Winter came to Nevada, bringing cold winds and the occasional snow. Zelda's animal hospital in McGill stayed busy with creatures seeking food and shelter, sometimes getting injured in the process. Harrison often rode to town with her, helping with the heavier work, never complaining about the long hours or the fact that they sometimes sat up all night with a critical patient. "This is part of who you are," he said when Zelda apologized for the third night in a row that they had spent in town rather than at the ranch. "I knew that when I married you. I would never ask you to change." In February, Zelda realized she was pregnant. The knowledge filled her with terror and joy in equal measure. She told Harrison while they were checking the cattle one cold afternoon, unable to keep it to herself any longer. He stopped walking, his expression cycling through shock, disbelief, and pure elation in rapid succession. "A baby? We are going to have a baby?" "In late summer, I think. Maybe September." Harrison picked her up and spun her around, whooping with joy, then immediately set her down carefully, as if she might break. "Are you happy? I know we did not exactly plan this." "I am terrified," Zelda admitted. "But yes, I am happy. Are you?" "I am beyond happy. I am going to be a father." He said it like he was testing the words, trying them on for size. Then he knelt in the dirt and placed his hands gently on her still flat stomach. "Hello in there. I am your papa, and I already love you more than I thought possible." Zelda ran her fingers through his hair, love swelling so large in her chest she thought she might burst. "You are going to be a wonderful father. I'm going to try." Harrison stood, kissing her softly. "And you are going to be an amazing mother." Pregnancy did not slow Zelda down as much as everyone expected. She continued her work at both the ranch and in McGill, though Harrison and Mrs. Grundy conspired to make sure she rested more and did not lift anything too heavy. The ranch hands became absurdly protective, rushing to help her with tasks they would never have assisted with before. "You would think I was made of glass," Zelda grumbled one afternoon after Pete had insisted on carrying a small bag of grain she could easily have managed herself. "You're carrying something precious," Harrison said, his hand coming to rest on her growing belly. "Let them help. Let me help." In September, just as summer was releasing its hold on the desert, Zelda went into labor. It was long and difficult, and Harrison stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand, wiping sweat from her face, whispering encouragement. When their son finally entered the world, screaming his displeasure, they both wept. "He is perfect," Harrison said, cradling the tiny bundle with hands that had gentled wild horses. "Absolutely perfect." They named him Daniel, after Harrison's father. He was a hungry, demanding baby who rarely slept, but neither of them minded. Harrison took to fatherhood like he took to everything else, with complete dedication. He walked the floor with Daniel at night, changed diapers without complaint, sang off-key lullabies that made Mrs. Grundy smile. Zelda found that motherhood did not diminish her other work, but rather expanded her understanding of it. She understood better now the fierce protectiveness of the mother animals she treated, the lengths they would go to for their young. She saw her son's development and understood more deeply how the young animals she cared for needed specific support at specific stages. Life settled into a new rhythm. Zelda reduced her trips to McGill slightly, especially in Daniel's first months, but she never stopped completely. Harrison hired a young woman from town to help Mrs. Grundy and to watch Daniel when both parents needed to work. The ranch thrived under their combined management, growing slowly but steadily. When Daniel was 2, a young boy from McGill appeared at Zelda's animal hospital with an injured hawk he had found. The boy, maybe 8 years old, had tears streaming down his face. "Please, Miss Zelda, everyone says you can save anything. Can you save him?" Zelda examined the hawk, noting the broken wing, the fear in its eyes. "I can try. What is your name?" "Timothy, madam." "Well, Timothy, healing takes time and patience. Can you be patient?" The boy nodded vigorously. Over the next weeks, Timothy came every day to check on the hawk. Zelda taught him how to handle the bird carefully, how to prepare its food, how to recognize signs of improvement. She saw in Timothy the same gift she had recognized in herself all those years ago, that intuitive understanding of animals that could not be taught, only nurtured. When the hawk was finally ready to be released, Zelda invited Timothy to do the honors. Harrison stood beside her, Daniel perched on his shoulders as the boy opened the cage door. The hawk hesitated for a moment, then spread its wings and launched itself into the sky, spiraling up and up until it disappeared. Timothy turned to Zelda with shining eyes. "Thank you. Thank you so much." "You did the right thing bringing him to me," Zelda said. "Not everyone would have cared enough to try." After the boy left, Harrison pulled Zelda close, kissing the top of her head. "You are inspiring a whole new generation of animal healers." "Maybe that is part of my purpose," Zelda mused. "Not just to save the animals myself, but to teach others to care." "You already taught me," Harrison said. "Before you, I would have just seen livestock and problems. Now I see individuals with their own needs and worth." "We taught each other," Zelda corrected. "You taught me it was safe to let someone in, that love does not have to be a cage." They stood together watching the sky where the hawk had disappeared, their son babbling happily on Harrison's shoulders, the ranch spread out behind them like a promise kept. Zelda thought about the scared young woman who had arrived in McGill 5 years ago, running from expectations and searching for purpose. She could never have imagined this life, this love, this sense of belonging. 2 years later, Zelda gave birth to twin daughters Emma and Sarah, who inherited their father's gray eyes and their mother's fierce determination. The ranch house filled with noise and laughter, with muddy boots and scraped knees, with animals both domestic and wild being nursed back to health in every available space. Daniel showed early signs of following in his parents' footsteps, constantly bringing home injured insects and asking if they could be fixed. The twins were still too young to show their inclinations, but they watched everything with bright, curious eyes. Harrison expanded the ranch slowly over the years, never beyond what they could manage well, always with consideration for the land and the wild creatures that shared it. His methods, influenced heavily by Zelda's philosophy, began attracting attention from other ranchers. Some called him soft, but they could not argue with his success. Zelda's reputation grew as well. People traveled from increasingly far distances to bring her their animals, from beloved pets to valuable livestock. She trained a small group of apprentices, including young Timothy, who showed remarkable promise. Her animal hospital in McGill expanded twice, becoming a fixture of the community. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Harrison took Zelda back to the ridge where he had first kissed her, where they had watched the mountain lion choose a different path. They stood in the same spot, older now, worn by work and parenting, but also deeper, more rooted in each other. "Do you remember what you told me that night?" Harrison asked, his arm around her waist. "You said you were terrified of wanting something so much." "I remember," Zelda said. "I was so scared of losing myself in you, of becoming someone I did not recognize." "Do you still feel that way?" She turned to face him, taking his weathered face in her hands. "I feel more like myself than I ever have." "You did not diminish me, Harrison. You gave me space to become more of who I was always meant to be." "You did the same for me," he said, kissing her softly. "I was just going through the motions before you, trying to build something my father dreamed of without understanding why. You taught me that success is not just about surviving, but about doing it in a way that honors everything and everyone around us." They made love on that ridge under the stars, their passion tempered by familiarity, but no less intense for it. This was different from those early days of discovery, but better in its own way, layered with years of knowing each other's bodies and hearts. Daniel was 12 when he told his parents he wanted to become a veterinarian, a real one with formal training. Zelda's heart swelled with pride, even as part of her mourned the thought of him leaving. But Harrison squeezed her hand and said, "We will find a way to make it happen. He deserves to follow his dreams just like you followed yours." They did make it happen, saving carefully and eventually sending Daniel to study in San Francisco. It nearly broke Zelda's heart to watch him leave, but his letters came regularly, filled with excitement about his studies and gratitude for the foundation she had given him. The twins grew into strong, independent young women. Emma showed a talent for ranching, riding horses before she could properly walk, understanding the cattle in ways that made Pete shake his head in wonder. Sarah was quieter, more studious, with a gift for numbers that made her invaluable in managing the ranch's finances. As the years passed, Zelda's hair started to show silver threads. Harrison's face acquired deeper lines. His hands grew more gnarled. But they moved through their days with the same partnership they had always had, working side by side, stealing kisses in the barn, sitting together on the porch each evening to watch the sun set. "Do you ever regret it?" Harrison asked one night when they were both in their 50s, their children grown or nearly so, giving up the possibility of a conventional life. Zelda laughed, the sound rich and full. "Regret this? Regret you? Not for a single moment. This life, this strange, wonderful, sometimes frustrating life we built together is exactly what I needed. You are exactly what I needed. Even though I showed up at your cabin demanding you save my cattle? Especially because of that. You saw what I could do and valued it. You said your ranch needed my hands, but what you really gave me was a place where my heart could be safe." Harrison pulled her close, and they sat in comfortable silence, watching the desert sky darken and fill with stars. Somewhere nearby, one of Zelda's patients, a coyote she was treating for an infected paw, howled softly. In the barn, the horses shifted in their stalls. The ranch hands were laughing over something in the bunkhouse, their voices carrying on the night air. This was home. This was family. This was everything Zelda had never known she needed until a determined cowboy had ridden into her life and asked for her help. Years later, when Harrison's hair had turned completely white and Zelda's hands had developed arthritis that made the fine work more difficult, they sat on that same porch with their grandchildren playing in the yard. Daniel had returned from San Francisco with a degree and a quiet wife, setting up a practice in a nearby town. Emma ran the ranch with her husband, a gentleman who understood her fierce love for the land. Sarah had become a teacher, educating the children of McGill and surrounding areas. "We did well," Harrison said, watching their legacy run and play in the evening light. "We did," Zelda agreed, her hand finding his with the ease of decades of practice. "Your ranch needed my hands, but it turned out I needed your heart." "And I needed yours," Harrison replied, lifting her hand to his lips. "I loved you from the moment I saw you standing on that porch, covered in coyote blood, defiant and brilliant. I loved you when you knelt in the barn and whispered to that dying cow like it mattered," Zelda said, "when I realized you saw them the same way I did." They sat together as the sun completed its descent, painting the Nevada sky in shades of orange and purple. Inside the house, Mrs. Grundy, now ancient but still running the household with an iron fist, was preparing dinner. The grandchildren's laughter rose and fell like music. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, and another answered. Zelda closed her eyes, feeling the warmth of her husband's hand, hearing the sounds of the life they had built together, and knew with absolute certainty that every scared step, every risk taken, every moment of vulnerability had led her exactly where she was meant to be. She had nursed animals back to health, yes, but in doing so, she had found a man who nursed her guarded heart back to life, who gave her a home not just in his ranch, but in his soul. And in the end, that made all the difference.